I've been meaning to do this for a little bit, but what the hey, I've seen this actually a few times, which is why this is going to be like a thoughts video, not a first viewing thoughts. So let's talk about the documentary on George A. Romero's Resident Evil, a film which featured a number of other creators and filmmakers, which is directed by Brandon Salisbury, and why I consider George's unmade pitch, and which went through many revisions before we got to the other adaptations, to be at least on a personal level, the greatest horror game movie never made. So let's begin. And the history is quite well documented, and while as is the basic reasons for why the film was proposed, but ultimately fell apart and leading to the odd state of adaptations ever since. And but it turns out the film actually expands upon a lot of details that were not previously known, and even is presented in a way that it actually pays homage to both the games and the visionary filmmaker, going into his early works with, including my personal favorite, 1978's Dawn of the Dead, and also how the original Resident Evil, or Biohazard was known in Japan, and came by letting developers work on the Famicom title Sweet Home. Kind of spooky that it shares a title with my current town, and of course they got into the commercial for the Japanese version of the second game, Resident Evil 2 or Biohazard 2, where there was a 15-second version, a 30-second version, and a full 2-minute trailer. And that prison that they ended up filming at, standing for the Raccoon Police Department, is quite the famous set, where here it has the game where, and it also featured some pretty notable characters at the time. I'm with the late Brad Renfro, who as he playing Leon Kennedy, and it turns out that even though there was some disagreements between creative and actor, as there often are, it turns out how that George actually did do quite a bit to not only get the material right, especially when I first read his drafts, among other screenplays in my junior year of high school, which when I took up that hobby, to and will also keep putting his own spin on the material through his lens, and which also involve lots of not just splatter, which often would have reportedly his frequent collaborator Tom Savini would have done a lot of the makeup work on there, as well as other frequent collaborators that would have been very much practical, old-fashioned, and and also in a way bringing things full circle. And while there were some plot points I still feel kind of strange, like making Chris revealed something like a native mystic kind of character. Her like was where as was common all this on the time. I'm making him and Jill dating and making Barry Burton and largely close to how he was in the games, but also making him a person of color. Her the spirit was definitely there in most of these drafts, as even if the letter of course had to be reworked. I mean, it typically takes at least 7 or 8 hours to beat the original game, though multiple versions I've seen can and do give awards for beating it in 2 hours or less, so about the ballpark of runtime for a feature. And while for the longest time was believed that Capcom were the ones that let Romero go from the project, that there was another and honestly more supported narrative that was Constantine Film and Bernd Eichinger in particular, or that was clashing Romero and which culminated in him considered to be, as I mentioned before, a bullet worth dodging, and leading to Paul Davis Anderson, who directed the first Mortal Kombat 95, Event Horizon, and the Kurt Russell action cult classic Soldier, all of which were way better films than what he actually ended up making. With the Jovovich movies, which lasted from 2002 to 2017, which, and even that first one, to this day, he still divided people into at least two major camps. There were people on one side of the fence who thoroughly enjoyed the movie, acknowledging it as its own thing, and with just enough action horror to satisfy someone for an hour and 40 minutes. I tend to be in the camp who did not particularly care for it. I mean, I maintained that I only enjoy the music in the first 15 minutes of the movie, and it's definitely interesting, and they also do indeed mention Welcome to Raccoon City, which, although they described it differently, I still maintain that's close to what I had in mind, and for an adaptation in terms of pacing, and also the Netflix event, which they also again refer to differently, but I outright called a biohazard and was not a bit surprised they actually have a single season. And watching this documentary definitely gives you a good portrait of the creative process of the franchise, but also who Romero was a person as well as a filmmaker. Or that's, I mean, depending on when you spoke with George, at times he definitely kept things very professional when the accounts were rolling, and others, whereas he definitely was always is willing to who who be who who okay, so how should I put this? Even to his final days, he was always willing to entertain. Where so naturally, when he passed on in 2017, the world did indeed lose quite the visionary, and his scripts for his unmade Resident Evil adaptation, and including an initial pass by McElroy, a are available to view at the Romero Archive. In his which is actually in the same set heading where the shopping mall for Dawn of the Dead was. This is maintained by his wife and child. or by his side in his final moments. And even, and the movie even ends on a note, given how like the video game adaptation spear has started to tick more and more upward. I mean, while there are still some duds critically and commercially, we're getting to a point like graphic novel twos before them. We're actually getting people who care about the material and are actually aiming to make not just money but also something of consistent quality that both fans and more general audience would enjoy. I mean, as is the case with things like 2019's Detective Pikachu, the 2023 Super Mario Bros. Reboot, and the Sonic trilogy. And with that in mind, and I am admittedly intrigued and cautiously optimistic about the reboot they're working on with up and coming director Zach Krager, who helmed the highly acclaimed Barbarian this year's Smash Breakout Weapons. And even though he's admitted he's going to be focusing on different characters in the same universe rather than the usual ones of Chris, Leon, and Al, he's also admitted he's going to be really going on a slow burn horror or aspect of the games, as well as the dark humor social commentary, as he is known to do. Best of all, Constantine Films finally relinquished her rights after all the diminishing returns, and much like fellow Capcom property Street Fighter, is now being handled by Legendary Pictures instead. Given the success on other IP, I'm very much open to seeing what they could do. Who, but let's fails, I cannot imagine Krager's adaptation being worse than anything that's come before at all. That's all for now, and I once again wish you all a happy Halloween season, so take care.